Hello and welcome to the Australia-India Institute's Masterclass series, being brought to you with the support of the Australian Government, the Department of Education and the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. My name is Darryl Moore, Senior Strategy, Partnership and Program Advisor for the Australia-India Institute, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's Masterclass titled Case Studies of Australian Vocational Education and Training Providers in India. As we commence today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I am hosting this masterclass, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today during this masterclass. Today's masterclass is number 7 in this series and continues the work of building engagement, networks and practical insights from across the education, training and skills sectors of Australia and India. Today you will hear from 4 distinguished and expert speakers. Firstly, Leo Brahmanis, Trade and Investment Commissioner, South Asia at Austrade, based in New Delhi, India. Secondly, Andrew Williamson, Executive Director, International Education and Enterprise Solutions at Holmes Glen TAFE, based in Melbourne. Kayla Phillip, Chief Executive Officer at BSI Learning Institute. And then finally, we'll hear from Julian DiMaggio, Director of the Automotive Centre of Excellence at Bendigo TAFE and Kagan Institute. Each panel member will share key insights into who they and their institutions are, what have they done or are they doing in the skills and training sector in India, and finally, what are some of the key lessons that have been learnt as part of that journey. Just a reminder that at the conclusion of the presentations from our 4 speakers today, we'll have some time for question and answer, and guests online are encouraged to enter your questions in the chat Q&A function, and I'll look to address these to the speakers as we conclude our event today. Prior to commencing our masterclass, I would now invite Kim Holthouse, Director of International Vocational Education and Training from the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, to share a few opening remarks. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Darryl, and thank you to the Australia-India Institute for organising these masterclasses and inviting me along today. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the Department of Education for supporting the masterclasses and several other skills projects that Australia-India Institute has been undertaking. As most of you would no doubt know, responsibility for skills moved from the Department of Education to the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations in July last year. And so we're still developing our international capability. But one of the things that we've been really looking at is how government can better support Australian vet providers to explore opportunities in transnational delivery. And of course, that includes in India. I was in India in July when Minister O'Connor travelled there to meet with Minister Pradhan and attend the G20. And during his meeting with Minister Pradhan, Minister O'Connor really emphasised his interest in this area. And Minister Pradhan obviously also very interested in having Australian vet providers partnering with Indian training organisations and exploring various models for collaboration. So I think the opportunity to showcase some examples of some transnational projects that are already working and showing that it's possible is probably the best way to encourage others. So these sessions, I think, will be a really valuable resource for everybody who's interested in this area. And I'm really looking forward to learning more today. I know Gillian is with us and going to talk about the Bendigo Kagan Institute's IACE project. When I was in India in July, I was lucky enough to go and visit IACE, and it really opened up my mind to some of the possibilities in terms of the range of ways, I guess, that providers can collaborate transnationally. So yeah, I think that's probably enough from me, but really looking forward to learning more from the other speakers as well today. Thanks, Darryl.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for the support of the department and for your words to welcome us today. So to commence, I would now formally welcome Leo Bramanis to present. Leo is a Trade and Investment Commissioner for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade, in South Asia. Leo leads the Australian Government's Australia-India Future Skills Initiative, a flagship program supporting India's workforce and skills development through partnerships with Australian vet providers. Additionally, Leo leads Austrade's efforts in the defence, advanced manufacturing and space sector in South Asia. So a pretty full agenda. So over to you, Leo, and welcome to you in Delhi.
Thank you very much, Darryl, and to the AII team, to the Department of Education and to Kim's team. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join, and of course to our audience today. I thought I might start with an outline of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, or Austrade, and then to talk about what we're doing in skills in South Asia through the Australia-India Future Skills Initiative. Speaking about the initiative, I'd like to talk about our journey so far. So our outreach, an inbound mission that we held, some trends that we've uncovered, and our demand analysis for India as well. And I'd like to culminate the 10 minutes I have with one insight and key findings for you, an insight on the key trends driving India's skills demand, and therefore the opportunity for the providers from Australia in the audience today, and 3 findings. One on how we've unpacked the skills demand trends in India, one on the key sectors that we're looking at for our program and why, and a final finding on working with prospective partners here in India and models to consider for Australian providers. So I'll stay on this slide. First of all, Austrade is the Australian government's delivery agency for trade, investment, tourism and education promotion to the world. We aim to grow Australia's economic prosperity through services and programs to businesses across trade, investment and the visitor economy. We have a significant global footprint, so 100 locations worldwide and 10 Australian offices. And we use our network around the world to turn market connections and insights into valuable export and investment support to and advice for Australian exporters and international investors, exporters to expand their global footprint in Australia and investors to connect to opportunities in Australia. I'd summarise what we do as giving advice, connections and support. And for this audience, I'll focus on the trade side to exporters or providers looking at overseas markets. I'd mention at present, all our services for Australian exporters, aside from some cost recovery for events, are free as well. And here in India, we work across, or in South Asia, I should say, across 8 offices, and we have 74 people, which is a 40% growth over the last year. And that's in response to huge demand that we've seen from the region, and also, of course, to the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, or AI-ECTA. Here in India, we have a hub and spoke model. So we have in our hubs here, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai and Bengaluru. And then in South Asia, more broadly, spokes Kolkata, Hyderabad, Dhaka and Colombo. Next slide, please. So I'd like today to focus, of course, for TVET on the Australia-India Future Skills Initiative, which is a national priority program for 4 years, as Darryl mentioned. And this aims to promote and position Australia as the skills provider of choice to meet India's emerging labour force requirements. We're currently 1.5 years in, so I'm taking the liberty to talk about what we've learned over that time period. We aim to support India to upskill its workforce through partnerships with Australian TAFEs, RTOs, dual sector universities, skilling organisations and edtechs, with an emphasis on skilling Indian people in India. Through the program, we are examining industry-led partnerships between Australia and Indian multinationals to identify new and creative models for skills provision in India, looking at what's been done before as well. And we've been working and are still happy to work one-on-one with Australian providers to understand courses, map their offerings to Indian players with demand, and then make introductions based on what we've heard as well. When the Future Skills Initiative was announced, we undertook an ambitious outreach plan to understand India's aims and how Australia can best partner with India, because there are a lot of options and, of course, also some complexities. That included company engagement with Australian and Indian multinationals and 21 face-to-face meetings with skills universities, corporates and training centres across Pune, Mumbai, Chennai, Ahmedabad and Delhi. We also met with Indian state representatives from more than 6 states and central and state ministries, together with Department of Education colleagues. We've also been analysing government priorities like the National Education Policy and the Indian Union budget, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. To give one example and to contextualise the picture on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, we also held our first major initiative for this last financial year, which was the Future Skills Initiative mission to India in April. We had 16 delegates, some of whom are on the panel today, representing 20 organisations from Australia, working across 3 cities. And it was a really packed program of policy briefings with Indian government, business networking events with over 95 Indian entities, 5 dedicated site visits and roundtables as well. So that set the scene for ongoing collaboration. Might move to the next slide, thank you. I'll move on to our first insight, and then I'll move into the findings from that. And the first insight that we've had is that India has a remarkable opportunity in skills as a nation across sectors driven by key trends. So India is the world's most youthful economy when it comes to its demographic, with the fastest growing aspirational middle class. 1 million people turn 18 every month, a stat that I find fascinating and love to repeat. The working age population outnumbers the non-working age. And by the middle of this century, 25% of the global workforce is predicted to be from India. So that's 1.5 times the entire population of Europe. However, currently only around 3% of Indians are receiving formal skills training in the vocational sector. So we've seen a demand in India to lift TVET to meet India's demand. And there's rapidly expanding workforce around future skills and training. There are some mega trends that drive this as well across sectors, so important to be cognizant of those. Some examples are India's $2 trillion investment in infrastructure in the next 5 years, through to 2025 actually, so only 2 more years to go. Tech inclusion is growing, so the e-commerce market is forecast to surpass the US in scale by 2034. India has committed to net zero by 2070 as well, and is investing heavily in renewables. So the market demand for skills, new skills, and ecosystem is ripe. There are also policy frameworks in India that have recognised this with great conviction. I mentioned the National Education Policy, or the NEP, but by 2025, its vision is that at least 50% of secondary and tertiary students will have exposure to vocational education, and therefore ensure millions of Indian people are equipped to enter the workforce in these new areas. India formed the National Skill Development Corporation in 2008, established sector skill councils and national occupation standards as well. The Ministry of Education has introduced vocational skills at the school level, and the Indian budget 2023 includes creation of job opportunities in India and skills for youth amongst the top 3 pillars of its Vision 2023. Next slide, please. On to our findings. Understanding this environment then and the megatrends, we had to ascertain our key sectors for our program and to look at the trend between Indian student demand for Australian courses and what drives this. We uncovered an aspirational market, and that's really our first finding, namely that the aspirational value of a certain sector or course and the correlation of that with employment demand in India for a skill sector is key when our providers think about what to offer and when we advise them. So in practice, in considering India, that means looking at what you offer and thinking about the aspiration of Indian youth for a particular sector, demand for employment and types of job roles, pathways globally to continue learning overseas or in some cases to work, and what Indian capability there is in a sector versus Australian capability, overlaying that then with global competition from other providers in India as well. We undertook that exercise and we uncovered finding 2, which is around our key sectors. So this isn't exhaustive, but we are focusing in our initiative on digital and future tech, manufacturing, infrastructure and logistics, medicine, renewables, health and executive education. So that's areas like AI, machine learning, data science, cyber, fintech, tourism, hospitality, renewables, which are high on the demand aspiration curve. But I'd emphasize that's not all. And we're also very open and keen to look at niches where Australia has a very special ability in TVET for India as well. On to the last finding is around prospective partners and models. So on our partner outreach that I outlined, we uncovered that skills universities and unis here provide a ready pool of students, of course, and then it comes down to finding the model. Industry bodies are very engaged in developing training for corporates and pioneer global education and employability models. So a one-to-many approach, as I'd call it. States and federal government bodies leverage government policies and programs for skills initiatives. Corporates do have demand in certain niches, and the sector skills councils here do look at introducing Australian standards and qualifications. So they're open to that across key sectors, of course, with nuances on our side as well. When it comes to models, we analysed possible ways to approach and enter the Indian market based on pricing and qualitative and quantitative feedback from Australian and Indian entities, as well as some quantitative research and success stories. It is a price-sensitive market. That's a theme that's come up over and over again in all of our outreach. And I know that other speakers will expand on this factor more, but we found that there are merits and challenges across three broad main models. The first is operating remotely and online. So again, a one-to-many approach, often with lower costs for training. Hiring in-country representatives is another option. And then, of course, the third and most involved is setting up a presence here in India. We don't have time for all of those today, but we are releasing a report on this shortly. So please do be in touch with me if you'd like a copy and I can share my details. We can also help you as exporters, of course, manage and navigate these leads and the models as well. Next slide, please. So in summary, I think our team will flash up in a moment, but we're very, very happy to speak further. There's a lot to cover, and cultural factors were another aspect which my colleague spoke in Masterclass 6 about, Arishigawa, who you can see on the screen. So a plug for another session that was held by the AII recently. And we are planning a number of future initiatives as well. So very much urge you to contact us on the Future Skills email address. And it's now my pleasure to hand on to other providers to discuss their on-ground experiences as well. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you for sharing such detail, and a large amount has been achieved in the first 18 months, which is fantastic. We'll now move on to our first speaker from the education sector now, and I welcome Andrew Williamson, who is an Executive Director at Holmes Glen Institute, one of Victoria's largest TAFEs. His portfolio includes international education, industry engagement, and Andrew has over 20 years' experience in the Victorian vet sector in TAFEs, also dual sector and government activities. Prior to joining Holmes Glen, Andrew was the head of the Victorian TAFE Association, so brings a wealth of knowledge to this topic and the opportunities that international partnerships provide. So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Daryl, and thanks to the Australia-India Institute as well. I would like to join by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I'm sitting on Wurundjeri land, acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Next slide, please. A little bit about Holmes Glen Institute, though I know there are some people online who know about Holmes Glen. We're one of Victoria's largest TAFEs. We started with vocational education and training, but we were the first TAFE to move into higher ed as well. We've got a suite there. We do senior secondary, and in particular, we do a lot of bespoke training for industry and community. We have campuses that go through from the centre of Melbourne out to the southeastern suburbs and another campus up in Eildon, and we deliver obviously from quite a lot of workplaces as well. It's our 41st birthday this year, but we've been in international, be that onshore, offshore, English language and so forth, for over 30 years. And we've got a student base of about 25,000 annually. One of the things that we pride ourselves in is our industry engagement. I'm a believer of we'll live or die by the strength of our industry engagement, and we've won a bunch of those Victorian Training Awards and what have you for various projects that we have that we've been engaged with. In terms of our offshore profile, historically we did a lot of work in the Middle East, and we had projects in China. We've still got projects in China, Japan, Indonesia, and we've spent the last 10 years in Mongolia. And obviously the project that I'm going to talk to today is in India. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a historical case study. We were approached by GMR Infrastructure, a big national civil construction company in India, still going, established in 1978. And the time that we bumped into them, about 2010, 2012, they were the fourth largest airport builder in the world. They had massive number of national highway contracts across India, and they were building lots of power plants and projects as well. They had challenges with their labour force and the skills that they required from their people. They found that they had a largely migratory, unskilled or semi-skilled workforce, and that migratory nature of the workforce meant that there was constant retraining that was required, and it was very inefficient and poor, had damaging productivity. The local vet system they found wasn't meeting the needs of the company. Uh, their subcontractors had all sorts of different methods and commitments to quality, so there was not a standard sort of GMR quality level, and what they wanted to be able to do was to move their workers from project to project, and that was one of the challenges that we were trying to meet, is to find a standard that was consistent and they could then mobilise those workers. A quote there from one of the CEOs of one of their divisions of GMR from back in 2012, and mindful that that was back in 2012, but that they were looking for their foremen, their leaders, their managers to have both a conceptual background, but also to be able to apply that, to have hand skills as well. So we weren't just training the workers, we were training their managers as well. Next slide, please. So initially, the approach that came to us came through a third party, an aid agency. As we teased out how this project was going to operate, we assumed direct engagement between ourselves and GMR Infrastructure. We started with a skills analysis. We did a skills needs analysis in country. What were their needs? We developed a set of curricula that would meet those training needs. Importantly, the project that we wanted to, and we did build, was about building their capability. It wasn't a forever project. It wasn't a project that set up a level of dependency that meant that we would never step out. And so we had a trainer program, and we developed all of the learning resources for the GMR Master. Sorry, joys of working from home. And so we prepared learning resources for the master trainers, and we worked with them over time so that they were skilled then in developing up the resources to be able to train the workers. We repurposed an existing training facility that we titled the Skills Development Institute. It was a residential facility based at the Hyderabad Airport, and it was a fit for purpose classrooms, workshops, training facility, and all of this occurred over a period of about 4 years. Next slide, please. So the two sort of parts to this project, one was what we called the Master Trainer Program, where we did a 14-week Train the Trainer program to build the capacity for people who would then be their trainers in time. We had an initial cohort of 30. Over the 4 years, we delivered that course to 120, what we call master trainers. There were two streams in terms of trade skills. One was a skills family that included bricklaying, plastering, rendering, and concrete finishing, and the other one had carpentry, formwork, and steel fixing. And the master trainers were assigned into one of those two skills families, and as were the workers that we were then training as well. It was really important for the employer that they build out the other professional and personal skills of their foremen and those trainers, and so we had a kind of broader, more rounded program of delivery to that cohort. The trades worker training program was designed specifically to GMR needs. It wasn't accredited. It wasn't Australian accredited material that we were delivering, but it was based on Australian training packages. But as we know, sometimes those packages don't actually work in an offshore context for an offshore workforce, and so we tailored them accordingly. We co-delivered in partner with our master trainers. We did the delivery to the workforce at the start, and then over time, we started to step back out of that. And by the time we did our final cohort of delivery, the master trainers were doing their delivery and we were simply supervising. So we built capability such that we could then withdraw from the program, and they were set up for the future, which was satisfying for both parties. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key lessons that we learned along the way, one was about having a really strong industry partner, and one that was genuinely committed to skills development. This partner, GMR, could really see that in investing in this way, they improved productivity, they reduced staff turnover, and they increased the safety, their commitments to safety through all of this as well. And having that strong partner was absolutely critical to the success of the project. The model that we designed, as I said, avoided creating a stream of ongoing dependence. And this partner was appreciative of that. They knew that we genuinely wanted to build their capacity such that we could then step out when they were right. And they're still rocking and rolling on all of that. We spent a good deal of time getting our model right at the start. We needed exceptionally good governance, roles and responsibilities of each of the parties. And we spent quite some time making sure that was well established before we actually then moved through. We had regular meetings, governance meetings and steering groups and so forth. We prepared our Australian staff well ahead of their in-country work. So we made sure that we had the right people to deliver. We know everyone, I think, who works in offshore training or education knows that there are some people who are suited to it and some people who just aren't. So we were needing to get the right people, prepare them well so that they would enjoy being in country and doing their work. And they were doing 14-week stints, so they had to be well prepared to be there for that length of time. And then they were on rotation. We engaged with governments, not in the way that they were part of the authorising environment, but we made sure that people knew what we were doing. That was state government, that was federal government, and the regional government over in India as well. Always find that it's good to make sure that everyone knows what you're doing, even if they're not part of the as formal partners in the project. But it's great to kind of have that support. And finally, I've got a dot point there about not becoming involved in the local politics. So our partner had some battles that they were fighting along the way. That's not our problem. We made sure that we kept our problems to ourselves, and they kept their problems to themselves. And then it was a very good partnership. That's it from me. Back to you, Daryl.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for sharing some of the groundbreaking relationship building and skills development work undertaken by your institute over the last decade. It's now my pleasure to welcome our third speaker today. So, Kayla Phillip, the Chief Executive Officer of BSI Learning Institute. Kayla is no stranger to the education sector, having spent the last 25 years in education management and learning and development, having worked in senior management and executive roles across the Middle East and also in Australia. Kayla started her career as a high school teacher and then managed franchises and training companies in Dubai and moved to Australia around 2000. Kayla was a delegate in the first Australia Future Skills mission to India in April that Leo mentioned earlier, and then subsequently led BSI Learning's mission to India in June in her current capacity as CEO to launch transnational education programs in India. So with that, welcome, Kayla.
Thank you, Daryl, and thanks to the Australia India Institute for the opportunity as well. I'm quite new to this whole transnational education. So from my perspective, I'll be talking about our last 6-month journey. Before I begin, just paying my respects to the lands that I'm coming from today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which is Sydney, Australia. Next slide, please. Just a bit about BSR Learning. So we're a private Australian accredited vet provider, very different to the government organisations and TAFEs. What we also do is a blend of everything learning, from corporate learning to EdTech to digital learning development and the registered training organisation. So we service the top BRW 500 companies in Australia and the Big Four banks in a variety of learning and development solutions that are both accredited, non-accredited and digital. We're the largest provider of inmate education in Australia. So all day, every day, we've got trainers and assessors across 80 prisons between New South Wales and Queensland, where we deliver foundation skills education for language literacy, numeracy, and vocational pathways that enable them to rehabilitate after their release. It's quite a high priority for both states to reduce crime and recidivism in our country, and education is the key to doing that. We are on several Australian government panels, both at a federal and state level across all our states as well. We got BSI Digital that develops bespoke online learning and digital solutions from induction all the way to compliance and anything specific to do with people development and digital learning. Learning within the RTO, we've got 25 qualifications nationally, spanning across leadership, HR, IT, cyber, logistics, supply chain, manufacturing, and hospitality. We obviously deliver those to our domestic students, and our first stab at transnational started in the month of April. We also have award-winning students and trainers, so both in Queensland and New South Wales, the New South Wales Government Training Awards, Student of the Year and Trainer of the Year. So our vision is changing lives through learning, and doing that is through building capabilities, shaping opportunities for our people, and igniting their potential through learning. Next slide, please. So before we ventured into this, last year in September, we had the Australia-India Business Exchange that was held in Bengaluru, and that's it's 12 months ago. I just had this feeling that I had to attend it to just explore what India is about, and that's when we were connected with Austrade. We did a bit of research as a business and a medium-sized RTO. What do we really want to venture into transnational, and what will be the first country that we want to actually take transnational? And some of the statistics that we know about in India, they've got quite an ambitious skills journey that they're actually taking on. And I'm reading through the numbers. It's 6.5% real rate of growth. They're going to be a 35 trillion economy. By 2047, that's 100th year of independence, their middle class is growing from 43 million to 100 million. And like Leo said, every fourth new entrant into the global workforce will be in India. And this is where we said, okay, we got to take this seriously. We got to look at what we want to do in India. And why do they need the Australian providers' help? With the ambitious journey that they're on, you could see very clearly that they can't do it alone. They have a national education policy that was put in place in 2020, but when you see 1 million young people graduating every year, and only 3% of those graduates are actually skilled and job ready, you immediately know that being a global skills capital of the world means that you've got to do globally recognized skills training. And how do you get them ready for that international mobility, so to say? So the current vet sector and the polytechnics, as you know, it's quite unorganized. I think it's going to take a few years for them to actually get to a level of maturity like we have in the Australian qualification framework. And that in itself is a business case where sharing knowledge, collaborating, and also predominantly looking at that middle class, because the students and people that can afford international education will always come to Australia to study or go elsewhere in the world to study. But I think the focus needs to be on the 100 million middle class that can't afford a foreign education. And how do you take education to them to give them the best chance to join that global skilled migrant workforce? The other thing that Leo spoke about was also the aging populations that are found in developed countries. So when they look at becoming the global skills capital, they're also presenting opportunities to their talent in India to be able to then help the countries, both the host and the ones that they're going to benefit from as well. So we started off with the Australia Future Skills Mission that was held in April. I was really privileged to be part of the delegation. And our whole journey didn't just stop there. Doing business with India means you've got to be seen again and again and again. So numerous meetings, post-mission, a lot of patience, and they probably take time to build trust. They want to know you as a person, and as Arushi put it the other day in her Masterclass 6, it's almost a whole family decision to do education with a provider. So it's almost like you've got to tick a lot of boxes, but at the same time, the rapport building and the trust building is really important, and it forms a big part of their decision making as well. Next slide, please. So if India wants to be the global skills capital, for me, Australia is the global skills training provider. And what a perfect match that is. So we got to educate, I think, and spread awareness in India about the quality of Australian education. I found it really, I felt it was really important for us to educate India about the Australian qualification framework. We take it for granted because we're in Australia. We go through vet qualifications. We don't have to explain it to our clients in Australia or our students why they need to do a vocational training program when they leave school. In addition to a pathway to university, or a lot of people in Australia pursue vet education when they're working as well to keep their continuing professional development. That's not really the case in India. Polytechnics and vocational education is looked at something that someone who cannot afford university does, or someone who cannot travel overseas does. And it's important to break that stigma, but also it's important to showcase that when we start doing mapping, you realize that our Cert 4s and diplomas and advanced diplomas almost map into their bachelor's and master degrees. So that's the level of quality and qualification we've got to showcase when we talk to them. It's important to also point out about the UNESCO Global Convention, because Australian qualifications are not just recognized in Australia, it's internationally recognized. You're talking about 21 countries when we put the Global Convention in place. So international recognition is really important, which ties into why they want to be the global skills capital, do an internationally recognized qualification as well. The other thing to point out is also with the aspiration of doing a international qualification also comes the questions and a lot of queries about what happens after I do this. What's my opportunity? Where do I go? What's my career path looking like, etc. So to have the answers with that as well, post-course outcomes, what are the job titles and the job positions you can avail of. For us, it was really important to do this in India, for the domestic industry as well. We weren't interested in pathways to come to Australia or jobs in Australia, but this was more, how do we lift the quality of education in India for Indian universities? How do we work in partnership with them? How do we come about with joint programs? How do we enrich their curriculum? Almost like giving them the opportunity to look at some of their existing programs and courses and bring it up to the level of quality that Australia provides and the currency of it as well. Next slide, please. So for me, it was, we always do vocational education for businesses in Australia. The BSR Learning is not a B2C business, so we don't do vocational education for students in school or for people that leave school. For us, a lot of our vocational education and our qualifications are delivered to people who are already in jobs and they want to upskill or they want to change careers or they're looking to keep their qualifications current. So it starts with CEOs all the way up to middle managers, emerging leaders, to supply chain, logistics, and manufacturing businesses. So we really wanted to look at, okay, what is the message in our marketing, in taking Australian qualifications out to India? And it's really important to kind of showcase the message around the quality of learning and the learning experience. A lot of times you'll find that there's a lack of understanding of how vocational education and training is delivered. Using the 70-20-10 principle, the combination of classroom theory, practicals on the job, and work experience. So break it up into segments that actually tell them what it is this whole experiential learning about that vocational education brings, which is what is important for skill building. Obviously, the quality, we are currently using Australian trainers to deliver our programs. We haven't ventured into the train the trainer model or any master trainer model yet because we're quite new. We want to give ourselves the opportunity to try and see how we keep the quality without having a lot of flexibility around it, which our partners are open to, and coming out with very innovative blended delivery models that are quite agile and flexible, but also economical. It was really important for us to showcase the career opportunities, and I've put an example of cyber program. So we're launching our cyber program in 2 weeks. I'm about to travel to New Delhi as well. And going through a lot of student surveys, parent surveys, university surveys, employer surveys, it almost was really important to get their response. Why would they do an Australian cybersecurity program? They wanted to see what kind of jobs are out in Australia, and not just Australia. How about the UK? How about the US? So we had to showcase job openings in those countries. What kind of employment types, part-time, full-time? Where do I get jobs, regional or urban? What kind of job titles? What kind of skills are required for these job titles? So to showcase that the vocational pathway and the skills and the units of competency are all tied back to performance criteria for a reason, because they're required for a job role. This is not quite structured and organized in India, and it was really important for me to drill down into that information so that they actually knew, if you need to be a plumber, you got to do this. If you got a chippy, you got to do this. If you're a level 9 public servant, this is the qualification you need to complete to be able to do that job. So it's important for them to understand that. The mobility, of course, in not just in Australia, but internationally as well, the potential. A lot of people want to know about the lifestyle as well. Cost of living, where do I go if I need to go? How much do you think I need to save? These questions come from a lot of parents, and the growth opportunity as well. So anyone that pursues an international education or a qualification from India is really looking to grow either within their country or work in their country for a few years and move on. So you kind of got to paint that picture and that distant dream for them when you deliver this particular message to them in your collateral. I think that's it. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you for sharing very much the strategic thinking that you're applying to developing the transnational vet education opportunity against some very compelling demographic outcomes that are emerging over the coming decades. So thank you for sharing. We now move to our final speaker for today, and I welcome Julian DiMaggio from the Bendigo, TAFE and Kagan Institute. Julian started his career as an apprentice fitter machinist and went on to study mechanical engineering. Since then, Julian's held senior positions in operations, general management, sales management in a number of industries, everything from aerospace, pharmaceutical manufacturing, through to advertising and construction, and of course the vet sector. Julian is currently the director of Bendigo Kagan Institute's Automotive Centre of Excellence in the Docklands and Bendigo. Both are in Victoria. And obviously there's a significant international leg to ACER as well. So with that, I pass over to you, Julian.
Thank you, Daryl, and thanks to the Australia India Institute for this opportunity. It's a really good one. I am at ACE today and just want to recognise that I too am on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to those people, their elders past, present and emerging. I could almost shorten my presentation by saying what they said, because I listened with fascination to especially what Andrew said, and I wish we had consulted with Andrew before we went down the IACE path, but nonetheless, it's turned out really well, and we're really proud of it. So that's really good. And some of the insights from Kayla were just fantastic, because I think that I like to have data-driven businesses, and I think some of that data will drive us into the future, especially with what we're doing with India. So I'll move on. Probably would dispute with Andrew every day which one of us is the larger TAFE. Bendigo Kagan Institute is also a very large TAFE. But just speaking about ACE in my slide, and we believe we're still the largest and most sophisticated automotive training centre in Australasia. We're not quite sure about that anymore, because there's lots happening in the auto space, especially in Thailand. But we offer 28 automotive courses. We have about 3,000 students who are predominantly apprentices. About 95% of our cohort are apprentices. And we get about 1,800 to 1,900 new ones every year. We have non-financial partnerships with JNPI in China, and we just had a cohort for a study group from there in the last few weeks. That was great. And also the delivery non-financial partnership we have with IACE in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Next slide, please. So what have we done? It's a long story. The IACE story started over 10 years ago now, where it was just a chance meeting between Phil Murphy, who used to have my job, and Mr. Singh from Maruti Suzuki, and they decided that they were going to meet in Australia at ACE and have a look at that. And from that, it turned into us consulting on the build of IACE and participating in the data collection and the pitch, essentially. And from that, eventually the project got legs, and we ended up developing the curriculum. It's currently about 90 units, and those 90 units, much like what Andrew was explaining, they're really Australian units of competency massaged to be deliverable in India. We also train the trainer, so we did actually go ahead and do that as well. And we thought that was the best way. And it was fascinating to hear Andrew hear him speak about how they'd already done that. So I wish we had spoken to him before, but anyway. And we injected what is a bespoke student management system we have at ACE, and has now permeated the bulk of BKI, and we use that to manage students also at IACE. Next week I'm back there. I was there, I think in April or May. It was Easter. I can't remember what time Easter was. I think it was April. And had been in India before, of course. And I love the place and love the people and love the food. So that's good. And probably a note about that, and a note towards the culture is I find the culture very similar to the Italian culture. I have an Italian background. It's very similar. So that even so far as the price sensitivity, I didn't find that as challenging as some people would, because of course Italians are like that, right? And I mean that in a nice way. But we're traveling there to reset and reiterate what our expectations are. And I think that's important, because I didn't think we did a good enough job as Holmes Glen in applying robustness to that. I think we needed to be much clearer about what the expectations were and what the plan was and what what the milestones were going to be. I don't think we've done that well enough, and we need to reset that. And the good people at IACE are open to that, because I think they've also recognised that is a problem. I think significantly, I was reading the ILO document before about apprenticeships and establishing an apprenticeship standard, or what is an apprenticeship globally, and hearing Pradhan and Modi talk about how India will have an apprenticeship system, but it's going to be 2047. I'll probably be dead by then, right? That's the truth. So we need to do something a bit before 2047. And so what we wanting to do, which is not unusual for ACE, we seem to be leading in the automotive sector, not only because we're the automotive centre of excellence, but because we're very commercial. And again, paralleling what Andrew said, we're very, very connected to industry, and that's so important. And so is IACE, because of course it is a partnership between the government of Gujarat and Maruti Suzuki. So it's paralleling that in that sense as well. So we want to go there and pilot an Australian-style apprenticeship. And I think we've just decided today that we'll probably scholarship 5 or 6, maybe even 7 students into an apprenticeship program. And what that means is it's very altruistic. It sounds very altruistic, but it also helps us, because we have local onshore international student programs. And what we want from IACE, and which I think is really fascinating, is we want IACE to help us make the student work ready. And there's a lot of reasons that's important. They need to be work ready for the local market, and listening to Kayla talk about, running programs for the local market are very important. And I believe that, and my heart is in that. However, I also wear, a commercial hat, and I need to inject students into ACE. And so I think there's the opportunity to do both. So I think we can run programs and it's probably why it's unique, but I think we can run programs at IACE for work readiness, and those work ready students can go into the workforce in India, as well as study in Australia. And either they could migrate here, or the intent is to send them back to India, and they can do further study in India. And as a result of that, we will, and also as a consequence of not properly aligning what the milestones should be, we were considering injecting a local administration person into IACE. We've also hit the go button on that today. So that's a big move for us, because we will have someone indentured in IACE full time that we'll pay for, which is only right. But I think this trip and the new ideas and concepts we're going to impose in this trip will be significant. I think that we'll see us taking much larger steps from here on. And those larger steps, for me, really are around the culture. And, we don't want to offend anyone. That's not what we want to do. But again, ACE has a very good reputation for just leading. And I think we can lead and not upset people. And I think a small pilot program will work and achieve phenomenal results, but again, not offend anyone. And that's what we're about here. And again, listening to Kayla and Andrew about their experiences and not getting involved in the politics, but achieving very clear objectives is important. So yeah, if we could just move to the next slide. Key lessons. The obvious one was the clear objectives. And I think, Andrew spoke about that at length. It's really important. And objectives aren't the same as the milestones. And you have to have both. We're learning that very quickly. And also the face-to-face, that people factor in India is so important. Again, it's not something that's foreign to me, being of Italian background. We have to know the people we're working with, and the trust factor that Kayla was talking about it's massive, because we are trying to influence what is a large operation, a large business that we have no financial bearing or financial interest in. So how do we do that if we don't have the relationships? Of course you won't, right? So we must. It's very important to us. But also, on the human level, it makes the business so much more interesting, right? So I highly recommend everyone does that. And that spoken statement of understanding, it's not enough. We need to we're coming out of meetings now thinking we have an agreement and then finding out we haven't. So that following up, I highly recommend people do that and run very formal meetings and document the outcomes and then communicate those outcomes. And speak to third parties to better understand the market. We're going to be doing a lot of that in this trip. We're going to a conference on the Friday, hosted by the Australian Skills Development Council. I think that will be pivotal for us. And we did something really smart in our first trip around IACE, which was we wanted to connect with dealers. We wanted to understand what was happening in the market, because despite a million, what Leo was talking about actually was a fascinating number, 1 million people turning 18 every month. What we discovered was that at the dealership level, there's a skills gap, right? So we thought we were going to go talk to them about the Australian skills gap, and lo and behold, we discovered there's an Indian skills gap. And it makes sense when you look at the data and the huge growth in the middle class. And I think the lesson we can impart, and much what again Kayla was saying, was we can impart expertise and knowledge, and that expertise and knowledge and experience in this case is that Australia is now emerging from what was maybe a 40-year blackening. It's a bad word, but the distaste for trades and apprenticeships, right? And everyone now knows that was very incorrect, and not only for the economy but for people, right? Because you can have a great life now being a tradesperson in Australia. And so we need to communicate that to India and apply a little bit more gloss to those vocations, because they can be very good ones in Australia if those people migrate. And there is no doubt in the very near future there will be very good vocations also in India, right? So that's a bit of our mission as well. And I think despite the fact that we are a non-financial partner at IACE, we're getting much more adept at managing them as if they were, right? So it makes for some uncomfortable meetings, but I think you need to do that. I think, again, it's about having the clear objectives and hard milestones, but learning how to do that learning how to have a voice when you don't technically have one. So, yeah, I think those things are really important. I think I probably said enough. I think in closing, what I want to say is, and it's going to sound a little bit facetious, but I think this is what we're doing here is really important, because I've learned so much just from Kayla and Andrew. We're always learning from Leo because he's Leo. But what I learned today from Andrew and Kayla is really important. And so I think just sending the message that people need to engage in these forums and share and learn, it can pay really big dividends. So, yeah, I want to thank, again, the Australia India Institute for setting these up and inviting me. So I'll hand back.
Thank you, Julianne. Thank you for sharing such deep insights into a journey that's been quite a few years in the making, yet still continues to evolve and iterate. And I think reiterating those important relationships that need to be built with industry and also the education sector and the constant evolution is a great takeaway from our last case study there. I do note that we're just coming up towards the end of an hour that's gone very quickly. So our Q&A will be relatively limited. Having heard from our three vet providers, though, I might just pass back to you, Leo, perhaps just to share a couple of insights as to what 2024, the calendar year, may look like as you continue to build on the excellent momentum already established via the Future Skills Initiative.
Sure. Thank you very much, Daryl. I'll try to keep it short and cherry pick a couple of things, but great to hear from the three providers as well. Always really inspiring and terrific insights from them, which certainly we can verify. A few things. So, as I've said, after the first year and a half, we have put together a number of insights on India. So there is a report that we've commissioned to support our on-the-ground findings. So we'll be releasing that. And we'll also be looking at hosting some virtual webinars and business connections for India and Australia, first of all, virtually as well. So please do look out. It'll be on the Austrade website, but doing something similar to this, but bringing in Indian potential partners and government entities to speak to you as well. So that's one side. More on the information sharing side. It's still underway, but we're also planning around March, April next year to have another outbound mission to India from Australia. So I'm working very closely with some colleagues on this call, actually on that one, amongst others. And so we are putting together a program for that and looking at having a combination of information sharing, connection between Australia and India, but then also, of course, business matches that Austrade does quite well, if I could say so myself. So that's over the next few months coming up. And yeah, we look forward to working with the audience and indeed with the panelists and the AII on these initiatives as well.
Thank you, Leo. So, look, on behalf of the Australian India Institute, I'd like to thank all our speakers today and, again, the support of the Australian government to create these opportunities for constant learning and sharing of what is a very significant opportunity that can be pursued by many as a team game over many years to come. So that formally concludes today's webinar, and I thank you all, and I thank you for the audience who has attended. The results of this will be published on our website going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.